Hello, everyone, and I hope you can hear me. Welcome to our plenary session on the future of education in the context of AI developments. Now, before we begin, I have to share a small confession. Today is the 13th of May, and in my family, this number is actually a lucky one. So if the internet decides to test that theory at some point today throughout our 90 minutes together, we will take it as a good omen, adapt, reconnect, and carry on, because that is, after all, what we're doing in the nonprofit sector, isn't it? And also learning about AI, what brings us together here. I am truly delighted to be here with you today, and I am very excited because I see participants joining from no less than 34 different countries around the world. So welcome, I'm Raluca Negulescu-Balaci, and I have the privilege and the joy of wearing three different hats today. First, I'm the Executive Director of UiPath Foundation, the organizing team behind this plenary session and the other events taking place this week. I want to express my gratitude to Andrea Panoiu, the logistic mastermind behind the entire event. Thank you, Andrea. I know you are behind the screens, making sure everything works seamlessly. And my second hat has to do with my role as a moderator for today's discussion. And I couldn't be more excited about the conversation we are about to have with our extraordinary panelists. And last but not least, my third hat, and perhaps the one that feels the most personal today, is related to my role as an alumna of the NGO Academy Social Innovation and Management program back in 2021. And I want to take this moment to acknowledge and thank NGO Academy for making today's event possible. And this webinar is part of the Community-Led Events Initiative, which exists precisely to create what we need most in the nonprofit sector: the space to learn from each other, not reinvent the wheel, to build synergies, and to pursue common objectives through collaboration. And as UiPath Foundation is proud organizer of this week's events, I am very grateful for the support that has brought nonprofit professionals from 34 countries into this virtual room today, as well as our esteemed speakers. And now I will move to our topic today, because 90 minutes sounds a lot, but the reality is that it flies away very fast when you dive into the topic, because it's quite complex. If you look across the world today at how education systems are approaching artificial intelligence, you'll find the full spectrum of responses. On the one hand, you have the example of Estonia, where the current Minister of Education has made AI integration a systemic educational priority, also recognizing that foundational and digital competencies are an important prerequisite for AI literacy. On the other hand, you have institutions, governments, policymakers driven by anxiety and avoidance, banning AI, ignoring its implications, and hoping that perhaps it will go away. Well, let me break the news to you: AI is here to stay. And then there is everybody in between, which I suspect to some extent describes many of us in this virtual room today. Curious, to some extent concerned, trying to understand what this means for our organizations, our missions, our beneficiaries, our communities, and the impact we aim to have. We are here today not to arrive at easy questions, easy answers, but to find better questions. And I know that exploring them together with our speakers will bring a wealth of knowledge and insights to all of you. And I must say that we have some of the most thoughtful, knowledgeable voices working at the intersection of AI and education in the world today. And I'm very happy they accepted to be here with us. And as you engage with us today throughout the conversation, I'm inviting you to leave your thoughts and comments in the chat. And my colleagues, Cynthia and Andrea, were very kind to make sure that these questions will be accessible to me, so I can ask our panelists. And talking about our panelists, I have the honor of introducing them, and I invite you to pay close attention to their bios, because I promise you the people joining us today are truly remarkable. So I will start with Natalie Lau. Natalie, welcome. Dr. Natalie Lau is the CEO of the Inventor Foundation, whose mission is to empower anyone, anywhere, at any age to create meaningful technologies that can transform their lives and the lives of people around them. She discovered Inventor while teaching high school computer science, and she saw firsthand its power to transform students from passive consumers of technology into active creators of it. She went on to complete her bachelor, master, and PhD in electrical engineering, and computer science and AI at MIT. She served as individual specialist for UNESCO's AI and the Futures of Learning project, and she co-authored the UNESCO AI Competency Framework for students. I'm also happy to welcome Dr. Sarah Ratner with us today. Sarah holds a PhD in education from the University of Sydney, where her research focused on national education policies and the international assessments used to measure their success. She also holds a Master of Educational Leadership and a graduate certificate in psychology from the University of New South Wales. And she brings to our conversation today a rare combination of experience as a classroom teacher, school leader, university lecturer, and C-suite executive at a global edtech company. She's the founder and principal investigator at the AI in Education at Oxford University Interdisciplinary Research Hub, and she consults UNESCO, the OECD, and the Asian Development Bank. Recently supported the publication of the UNESCO AI Competency Framework for Teachers, and has been awarded an Oxford Policy Engagement Network Fellowship undertaken in placement with the OECD. Last but not least, I'm very happy to also welcome Catalina Rață, who is my colleague at UiPath Foundation and our Deputy Director at UiPath Foundation, the nonprofit organization created by the global technology company UiPath back in 2019. The mission of the foundation is to change the trajectory of children living in poverty through long-term personalized support and technology-enabled education, developing 21st century skills, including programming and AI literacy. And since 2019, UiPath Foundation has positively impacted over 80,000 children, supported by 600 volunteers who have contributed more than 24,000 hours. And under her leadership, the foundation launched the AI Generation Curriculum, a free open source AI literacy program for high schoolers that is available in Romanian and English, co-developed with the Inventor Foundation and aligned with UNESCO's AI Competency Framework for Students. So with this incredible wealth of expertise, let's dive directly into the topic. And I wanted to make sure that you can all hear me and that you are comfortable in your chairs with your coffee, with your water, and ready to start the conversation. So it looks like it. Great. So I will start with Natalie. Natalie, as I was going through your bio earlier and mentioning that you contributed to the UNESCO AI Competency Framework for Students, it came to mind that this was one of the first framework of its kind globally. And in the meantime, more than 20 different frameworks on the topic of AI education have emerged since. And I was wondering what keeps the UNESCO framework relevant for educators around the world today, and what do you think educators should pay particular attention to at this point in a world in which AI is moving so fast and shaping so at such an accelerated pace our lives and education particularly.
Yeah, thank you for having me and thank you for the question. I think the point you made about it being a popular framework is all due to other people adopting it. So if you're using it in the audience, thank you for doing that and supporting our work. Maybe I'll start by kind of verbally outlining the framework. So the UNESCO AI Competency Framework for students, it has 3 progression levels and 4 aspects of AI. And the 3 progression levels are understand, apply, and create. And the 4 aspects are human-centered mindset, AI ethics, AI techniques and applications, and AI system design. We purposely had the first 2 aspects be non-technical. So they're human-centered mindset and AI ethics. And then the third aspect is the technical AI techniques and applications. And then to round it out, the final one, which is AI system design, is not quite about just the infrastructure of AI, but it's about how AI fits into human, governmental, like worldwide systems. So when designing the framework, we really wanted it to be human-centered and very future-oriented. So we kind of chose to emphasize what we thought would be enduring competencies. And those are like critical thinking, agency, creativity, collaboration, and understanding societal impact of AI. So of course, the technical skills and knowing how to use current technologies are really important. But we wanted to kind of look beyond that because AI is moving so quickly. We want to make sure teachers and students aren't just prepared for the AI of now, but they're prepared to think about AI in the future or other forms of technology that comes out in the future. And I think another piece of the framework that I'd recommend educators pay attention to is the framing of students, not just as consumers and users of the technology, but as co-creators. So a lot of my research at MIT App Inventor and App Inventor Foundation is centered around this concept of computational action. So basically, it's formed from constructionism and experiential learning theories, but we find that in order to make computing education more engaging, especially for students who are from like under-resourced or underrepresented backgrounds, it's really important to give them opportunities to create with computing in ways that can improve their lives or help their communities in a really active way. So a lot of this framework is around like treating students as creators and decision makers and helping them understand how AI systems work well enough to kind of question them, critique them, and shape them responsibly. And yeah, I think I'd be happy to give more examples of what that looks like in action later on in the conversation as well.
Thank you so much, Natalie. This is very, very inspiring to connect these learning processes with the reality on the ground and have an impact in the communities for students. And I'm very excited to learn more about it during our conversation. So I will move to Sarah now, and I know that you will find you'll see Sarah on the screen, but you'll hear her from a different user. We encountered some tech issues, but we managed to solve them. And I'm very happy Sarah is with us today. So because I wanted to look a bit at the UNESCO AI competency framework for teachers, and Sarah, you are invited to review it. From your perspective, what do teachers most urgently need to understand about AI today to really prepare their students for the future? And where are the current teachers' training system failing short from your perspective?
Thank you so much. And I hope the sound is working okay. Can you, all right.
We
Excellent. So look, thank you for the invitation to be here. And I think Natalie did so much of the hard work for me there in setting that up with that beautiful explanation of the student framework. And I think, as always, we can't look at one without the other. The interaction between the student framework and the teacher framework is so important. And Feng Chun and Mutlu did an amazing job of putting together this teacher competency framework that is really then designed as a guide for local actors to be able to operationalise and contextualise in terms of the needs of their local learning environment. Reflecting on your question, Raluca, it's an interesting one in terms of what teachers need right now in terms of being in the classroom. And overwhelmingly, I feel like teachers need the space to sort of step back a little bit and ask the question themselves as to what information or understanding or evidence do they need to be able to feel capable and empowered to be able to work with AI in education. And that's going to be actually a very personal answer that comes depending on the context they're in, the children they're teaching, the work that they're doing and leading. And I think Natalie made an excellent point about students not as consumers but as co-creators. And very much that's what we are as teachers. We are co-designing the future, and it's about not just kind of relenting control and letting, technology companies or policymakers or other areas direct what the future of education looks like, but actually having the teachers who are in the classrooms working with young people co-design what that future looks like. And to do that effectively, we need understanding. And I think this is the really key point in terms of teacher education around this, is it's not about, making everyone into an AI expert, but it's actually developing a level of understanding that we know what we're working with, we know what's good about it, we know what we don't know about it, and that we better understand the impact it may have on teaching and learning. And I think that's where the research and the development of the evidence base of that is really important. But that's got to be a collaborative effort. And it's really, I think, at the heart of what we're trying to achieve with AIEOU and the Interdisciplinary Research Hub of bringing people together, is to say that these questions can't be answered in silos. It can't be just the teachers or just the technology companies or just the policy professionals. It actually needs to be a shared conversation. And teachers need to lean into that conversation and have the seat at the table and be part of the discussion. And I think that that is a really key element of this whole education process. And, in education, we're used to kind of these rolling fads and things that come through education but I think this is a fundamental shift that is happening. And I think it's really, really important that teachers are on the front foot with this, no matter what their position may be. They may be against, they may be for, whatever position needs to have an understanding of what it means and the impact it may have on teaching and learning in their classroom. So I think any work we can do to support teachers to develop that level of understanding to make an informed decision is really important.
Thank you for sharing this valuable perspective, Sarah. In my conversations on AI in different spaces, there's always the need to dismantle a bit this myth of the fact that AI will replace teachers. And hearing you say how important the role of teachers is gives me gives me a lot of trust that we need to invest more in teachers. And yeah, stepping back is not always very comfortable, but thank you for sharing this and talking about the uncomfortable and challenging spaces. I will now move to Catalina. And Catalina, your work sits at the direct intersection of global AI trends and the realities of underserved communities that bear a lot of complexity, and there are many challenges there. As you bridge the educational landscape with the mainstreaming of AI, what do you think are the most significant gaps you have encountered in your work at UiPath Foundation, and where do you see the greatest untapped opportunities?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raluca. And I'm very, very happy to have this joint conversation with Natalie and Sarah. I think their perspectives are um, they complement each other so well, and we are really fortunate to have them here. Since we do have a very international audience today, I want to give a bit more context on the social and educational reality of children in Romania, because this is where we mainly operate at this point. Um, we have one of the highest rates of child poverty in Europe, and unfortunately, for several years, we have led this ranking, which means we are confronted with persistent child poverty that, of course, triggers educational poverty across the country. And I think this is an important element because we also have one of the lowest rates of digital skills in the European Union, both at the level of the general population and also at the level of children and students. Of course, with these gaps becoming even more wider in the communities that are affected by poverty and in the communities that we work in. At the same time, we see an increasing rate in the use of generative AI tools for students. We see this from the statistics, but we as an organization also see this in our daily practice because we work directly with more than 1,000 students. And I think that low digital skills for students, but also for the support system around them, teachers, parents, caregivers, coupled with a very high increase in the use of generative AI does have the potential of creating a perfect storm in our educational system. So what I can share is that at the level of our organization, we've noticed this dynamic back in 2022, 2023, and we really wanted to bring AI literacy to students in our program, students from poor families, and many of them are in rural or in small urban settings. And we wanted to make sure that this is not um, just another technological breakthrough that happens to them and not with them or for them as well. So that's the moment when we partnered with Natalie and with her team at the App Inventor Foundation, and we actually created AI Generation, which Raluca referenced at the beginning of the conversation, which is a curriculum that's forming foundational AI literacy, and it's free of charge, and it's accessible for non-technical teachers and non-technical learners, and it's human-centered, as both Natalie and Sarah referenced. And we actually ran it in our communities in several cohorts of students. And what we saw was that we didn't see any difference in the learning performance for children in rural areas versus those in urban areas. And we didn't see any differences between boys and girls. So I would say that um, the potential to build AI literacy evenly across different and social and economical and cultural contexts is there in many ways. We just have to use the proper tools and the proper frameworks to and to actually implement it. Then another great opportunity that I would say I can see is that I think that in this particular moment in time, um, and with this sense of urgency that I think all of us in the educational sphere are feeling in a way, I would say that we have the actual opportunity to prioritize digital education and AI literacy, and we do have the more focused attention of policymakers for this topic more than probably we had it before. I think many of us work in this space, and we know that we've been talking about these things for many years now. But I feel that we do have a special window of opportunity to move from strategies to actual programs and interventions and serving learners and teachers and the entire school ecosystem.
Thank you, Catalina. And while we're here, I have a group question. I'll keep you a bit. I'll ask you to answer first, because you mentioned the opportunities related to building AI literacy, even in underserved communities that we need. We know there's a need in the entire society. It's not something confined to those communities, though those communities are more vulnerable to what's happening right now, and we need to pay a lot of attention on how we approach this meaningfully. Because you mentioned opportunities, I wanted to ask all of you, which are the opportunities and the threats that you see in terms of AI insertion in education? And Kata, maybe you want to take this question first and talk about threats, because you mentioned some opportunities, and then I'll invite Natalie and Sarah to share their thoughts as well.
Yes, of course. So in terms of what I worry about and what I feel that the threats are, I'm thinking in two directions. On one side, I think we have to think about the learners and the students. And I am worried from what we see in practice about the excessive dependency on AI for educational purposes, and more specifically, the excessive outsourcing of thinking, because I think bad habits are easy to form. And unfortunately, unstructured, unguided use of AI can become a bad habit for learners. And I'm also worried about the fact that at a greater level, educational systems don't really have the opportunity are outpaced completely by the technological developments, and in reality they cannot keep up at the level of changes in technology that happen. And I'm thinking that with this feeling that we are all running a sprint, we don't have the space to do that step back that Sarah referenced to, and to take the time to reflect a bit on what we are doing for education in general. So I think these are my top worries.
Yeah, very legitimate worries. Sarah, do you want to take the question and share a bit your thoughts on threats and opportunities?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. It's an interesting, I think one of the things that genuinely excites me about this opportunity is the conversations that it's forcing us to have. So, we know that there are elements of our education systems that honestly have been broken for a very long time. When we think about, the way we do assessment, the way we do accessibility and inclusion for all students, the way we look at equity of access to quality education around the world, there are things that need addressing. And one of the things that genuinely excites me is I'm a bit of a nerd about assessment. And all of a sudden I see my LinkedIn feed and my social media filled with educators and technologists and policymakers having really detailed conversations about what good assessment looks like in practice. And so I think, and I know it's an unusual answer to your question about opportunities for AI, but it's actually creating an environment, as you said so beautifully, Catalina, that we have the attention of policymakers and technology companies who are now actively trying to find alternative solutions and new ways of thinking around this. So that genuinely excites me. But at the same time, I'm deeply concerned about how we use student data to do that. And that's something that really concerns me. particularly, you know, if we've got publicly funded education systems generating pupil data that are then being used to train commercial AI models. I'm not sure that children and young people can actually consent to use their data in that way. So thinking about the regulation of that and how that data is developed. I recently had an opportunity to travel to Brazil for the UNESCO AI Unplugged event, and I was so impressed by the policies that they're developing in this space that are really led with child safety and children's rights, and thinking about, you know, the data and the opportunities to roll out these models. And a colleague of mine at the Oxford Internet Institute says, you know, if the product is free, you are the product. And in Brazil, they're doing some really interesting thinking about the rollout of these tools in terms of what that means for the student data and how that is used then in these systems. So I think that, to me, is we have this tremendous opportunity to solve some long-term broken systemic issues in education, but at the same time, we can't let go of what we know is good pedagogical practice, what we know is good human rights practice in terms of autonomy and ownership and agency over our data and our identifiable information in particular. So I think, yeah, we're existing in this, you know, binary of so much opportunity, but so much challenge to solve as well.
Yeah, and I guess this is what makes it so challenging to navigate. Natalie, can you please share with us what's your perspective on this? And I'm sure you share most of the things that Sarah and Catalina mentioned, but I'm also confident that you have some insights that they haven't.
Yes, it's always intimidating to go last when Sarah and Catalina have kind of said key points. But for a lot of my research, I look at like coding education and AI education specifically. And we're looking at how vibe coding and generative AI are impacting how students learn, not just coding, but in general. So recently, a lot of research has come out that shows there's less neural engagement when people are writing using LLMs, especially at younger ages. There's also changes in like reading patterns linked to tech use that are literally restructuring our brains. And in the K through 12 stage, when kids' brains are developing, that's also really important. And then more so in the college area, a lot of computer science students are now using Gen AI who are just freshmen or first years. And as they're learning coding, they're using these tools very heavily. And some research is coming out that says it's kind of impairing their conceptual understanding of computational thinking, knowledge, and concepts. So, like my team, we're very focused on trying to get at using AI for good, so not banning it at all. But I think a core of what we're trying to do is figuring out how learning with technology can be more carefully thought out with more attention to kind of developmental stages, social behaviors, and well-being. So a lot of that, I think, a lot of our solution to that comes from like the best practices and pedagogical practices that we know. So we know that direct instruction is effective, but students generally don't love it. And there are other student-centered approaches that are also effective and more liked by students. And we're very excited that AI is going to make them a lot easier to implement. For example, like project-based learning, computational action, as I mentioned before. A lot of what teachers talk about when they say it's difficult to implement have to do with assessment and evaluation. So if I have 20 different projects in my class, how do I give good attention and mentorship to each student? And that's kind of what AI can really help teachers with in developing these better classrooms and depending on what resources you have. And I think on the vibe coding side specifically, we're currently looking at developing a vibe coding tool within App Inventor that tries to figure out what are the foundational computational thinking concepts and practices that students really need to develop and fast tracking them through that. So one of the biggest issues with the Gen AI tools right now for coding is you just type in a prompt that's just like, make me an app that does this. And it spits out code and you don't understand anything about it. you run it, it kind of works. Maybe it's a little buggy. Maybe it's exposing everyone's private data. You don't know. So we're trying to figure out, what do people need to know in order to properly first like scope the problem. Is this app even worth making? Does it make sense for the system that you're applying it to? Second, how do you debug it and think about it from a systems level? And then third, how do you test it in the real world and get good feedback? And then obviously like knowing enough about computer science to go in and kind of do minor tweaks. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but when I use Gen AI to code, sometimes I'll be like, make a website that looks like this, and it looks 90% perfect. And then I say, can you make this one button green? And it changes the whole thing, and it's not what I want at all, right? So like giving people enough knowledge to make these smaller tweaks so that Gen AI can do a lot of the coding for them, and they can kind of spend their time and energy on the things that matter most. So like problem scoping, systems thinking, testing and debugging, and user design.
Yeah, that's very valuable, Natalie. And while you were mentioning all the cognitive impact that AI has on students, I was also thinking about what Estonia is doing right now and how they're prioritizing AI in education, and they understand you can't move forward without it. And at the same time, they're making sure that the kids are still using a school handwriting to take notes, because that keeps their brain alert and it doesn't lead to those cognitive challenges you were mentioning. So there are ways to marry the two approaches in a way that can help to make the most out of AI in education. I think we are all, and there's a lot of data and research, as all of you mentioned, but we're still, I think it's quite difficult to redesign educational interventions right now, even though there's so much data. But Natalie, I wanted to continue the conversation on computational thinking and to have a deep dive into this, because building AI literacy at global scale through App Inventor means navigating a real tension between reaching as many learners as possible and ensuring that engagement goes deep enough to develop genuine computational thinking. How do you hold these two ambitions together, and what have you learned from communities where the balance is the hardest to strike?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So currently, App Inventor serves almost 30 million people across the world. We're in every single country and region, and 53% of our users are from the developing world. So we really focus on providing these free and open source resources to places that don't normally have them. And I think a lot of the challenges come from the technical side, actually. So in a lot of countries where they don't have access to the like newest iPhones or Androids, they're using feature phones that are like possibly 10 years old through like donation programs. So we have to make sure that our development platforms work all the way back to like Android 14, which is a huge technical undertaking. And I think another piece is, how do we support the educators? Because the contexts are so different. They're doing a lot of different things in the classroom. The student needs are different. Maybe they don't have like regular internet or electricity access. So there's not really a one size fits all solution. And what we do there is try to establish local communities of practice. So we'll go over there, try to understand like the environment and context and what they have to work with, do a few workshops, and then identify community leaders in that community who are really passionate about computational thinking and computational action, and try to provide them with the resources and support from our end so that they can do the work in their communities and train other teachers and run these programs. So like we don't know the situation in like India as well as our nonprofit partner there, for example. And one example I'll give is, we have this competition we run every year called the Global Appathon. It's free, virtual, for people of all ages, and you can submit an app that you made with App Inventor that addresses one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the coolest apps I've seen in the past like 10 years was from the Dharavi slums of India. it was by a group called Dharavi Girls, who were like women who are learning computer science. And they try to tackle the problem of sexual harassment towards women. And they realized their mothers were coming home from work late at night, and then there would be harassment or stalking. And they came up with like a super simple idea. So the app, you have the phone in your pocket, and if you feel like someone is following you, you can very discreetly press a button and it lets out a copy of a police siren. So it tricks the other person into thinking there's police activity nearby so that they hopefully like go away or stop following you. So from a technical perspective, that's such a simple solution, right? But if you try to go to AI and say like, design me a solution that solves this problem, I really don't think it would have come up with something that simple. Only people in that community know what works. And I think that's part of like participatory design, co-creating solutions. There are, of course, like other more complicated AI solutions that we've seen on the ground, but it's for me, it's not about like using the most advanced AI technology all the time. It's about finding what tool fits your needs and using it to kind of better your community. So that's kind of what we try to do is like make it community first and figure out what their contexts and needs are.
Yeah, congratulations for this amazing work, Natalie. And we're very lucky to collaborate on some AI-related initiatives such as the AI generation. Yes, community first, human first. So what I hear very often at global level when we discuss about AI and education is that you have, as UNESCO framework very well says, a human-centered approach. So you use and deploy the technology in such a way that you never forget that it needs to have in the center what's very human about us, and to have this intentional design that serves people, not undermines their capacity to learn, to develop. So I think that's very well put, and thank you for sharing that with us. And I will zoom out a bit now, moving from communities to policymakers to some extent, and I will shift the discussion to Sarah, because research is excellent at naming the problem. So we have all the data information to shape policies that are human-centered and that have positive impact in society when it comes to AI. And Sarah, I was curious from your perspective, what would a genuinely equity-centered AI education policy look like in practice? And if you are already seeing in your work with different governments, countries that are moving the needle in this area and that are really doing great progress and that could give great examples for others to follow.
Thank you. A nice, easy question there. Thank you. Look, it's interesting, and I take on board your point. Typically, researchers are great at naming a problem. I think the challenge we have here is that we don't actually have the full range of the evidence base that we need in this instance to make these decisions and inform these policies. It feels a little bit like we're kind of building the aeroplane as we fly in terms of the research in this space at the moment. Because, as you know, the way sort of academic research works and the time it takes to really get robust, reliable evidence, and the technology is shifting so fast, it's really hard to keep that aligned. I think what is a really positive thing in that way is that there is a lot more effort that I'm seeing across countries and across, consortiums forming to try and work together on this. So, policy working with tech, with researchers to design, build, regulate, and understand concurrently, which is quite an interesting approach to take. In terms of the policy and the way it's working globally, I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing work really well is where governments and organisations are taking that collaborative approach, where they're not sitting in isolation and deciding what works in their context, but actually coming together saying, what's working for you, how can we learn from that, how we can benefit. And I think the more shared conversations that we can have, the better. And I think what's really refreshing is how open people are to having these conversations. And I'd be interested to see if others have experienced this as well, but I'm seeing more than ever a willingness to come together and share knowledge, share understanding, work together to address the issues that are coming forward. I think the leadership that's coming out from some of the intergovernmental organisations around this is really useful and helpful. I think universities are really trying to support educators with the research that they can. And I'm really seeing kind of a collective approach to this, which is exciting and refreshing. It's always difficult to say, I think this country is doing this really well, or I think this policy is leading really well, because ultimately good policy has to be for the benefit of the people working and living in that environment. And so what is good policy in the UK may not be good policy in Romania, where you are, or in the US, where Natalie is. So policy is really dependent on the people. And so I think overwhelmingly the good policies that I'm seeing coming out are the ones where there's lots of public consultation, there's lots of stakeholder engagement, and they're developed really through participatory methods. And I will share one example. We recently hosted a workshop with Faye Skevington, who is from the UK Department for Education, and they have launched a set of Gen AI product safety standards. If you're not familiar with them, I'd encourage you to have a look. I think they're outstanding in terms of the way they're approaching this. And she shared with us the way their team went through developing these standards, and it was totally through participatory methods. They did things like a theatre workshop with young people to, really understand what it felt like when someone took your IP, right? And just the way they developed these standards collectively and through participatory methods. So I think learning from a lot of the policy that I'm seeing that's really good is not necessarily the policy itself, which needs to be very context specific, but actually the participatory methods that policymakers are using to develop them collectively. Because I think this is one of those situations we have to have active voices in this. As I said earlier, we have to be active participants and co-designers. I think it would be a great shame if this was just policy or regulation or practice that was imposed on education. I think it has to be co-designed.
I definitely love this idea of co-design and participatory approach in policy making, and I think it's the ideal approach for many of us in the nonprofit sector. And we are seeing also in Romania some efforts to build collaboration in this respect. And I do believe the future is collective impact, working together to really shift these challenges on the ground, and many governments are in freeze mode at this point because they feel they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the resources, the understanding, but they should definitely find partners in the nonprofit sector, in the business sector, to make sure that they draw from the knowledge and expertise to make sure to build the AI policy that makes the most sense and that's the most meaningful and human-centered for their societies. So I'm glad you're that optimistic, Sarah, and I'm trying to channel that kind of optimism. And that I will move now to Catalina, because I was thinking about this inflation of resources on AI at this point. I mean, once AI became mainstream, took over our lives, we've also seen everywhere an accelerated movement in creating resources for schools, high schools, teachers. So this is quite intimidating, I would say. And for professionals in education and for nonprofit practitioners, what would be your advice here? How do you navigate this inflow of resources? What's the North Star when it comes to how you pick those resources that are useful, documented? What's your take on this?
Just to make a small joke, I remember back in 2023, I think it was, when I've joined the Digital Learning Week in Paris, and I've learned, it was the first time for me to hear about the term of snake oil AI, and I think since then I'm putting all the tools and the instruments and the resources through this filter. Does this seem to be snake oil AI or not? In a more serious note, I do think that education is one domain where AI is expected, so it's an expectation to produce significant changes, even revolutionary changes. And I think that innovation only happens after several iterations. So partially, I assume that the inflation of tools and instruments that we're seeing is also due to this process. And as we move forward, we might see these tools and instruments filtering themselves in terms of impact and how suitable they are in real life. But I think what we have tried to do in our organization was to think of the journey that the learners go through. And we almost never or rarely promote AI tools per se. We actually think of the learning process and so on. But I think what was on our checklist was to prioritize and even protect learning, and as Natalie and Sarah mentioned, to use solid pedagogy practices, to use on-point instructional design, to have the learning experience, keep its main components in place, and not to simply run it through an AI tool. So I think that all the instruments and the setups and the frameworks that we use should protect learning and prevent this cognitive offload that we're talking about by design. So this should be the initial design, not something that we then troubleshoot for, so to say. Then we've tried to actually prioritize and select approaches that are indeed human-centered, as we've mentioned here. So approaches that look at AI as an instrument that actually is supporting human strive, where humans are in control of their decision, of their data, of their privacy, but also have the responsibility for the AI system that themselves might be creating or putting out there. So I can say that I think we've seen this human-centered approach pay off in our courses with in our classes with students, because after they went through the content, we saw them starting to have more critical questions around how is this AI tool built? What data does it have behind it? Are these outputs correct? Are they biased? How was this system created? So I think that we can actually see human-centered approaches being very, very useful to empower students to think of themselves as owners of the process they are going through and in control of the technology they are using. Something else that was really important and is connected with something that Natalie shared earlier. We wanted to focus on the perception that AI should be a tool for good for positive social impact, and not to use technology for the sake of technology. And I do have one example from the Appathon, the competition that Natalie mentioned. We had two students from Romania participate. They didn't win, but that was not important, because they had a chance to think of a problem that their community faces, and to observe that problem and to name that problem. And in the end, they designed an app with AI functionalities that was helping people in their community recycle in a more efficient way. So I think this is the type of challenge that we should put forward for students. And then I think we do have some design prerequisites that should not be negotiable in any context. And I'm thinking here of um, making sure that there is human oversight, that the systems are transparent, that we have safety filters and safeguarding functionalities, that we do risk assessments for these tools in terms of child safeguarding and appropriate age use. So I think for us in education, these are really important questions. I think there's a balance between being too protective and shielding the instruments, and being adopting tools too fast. But these are important questions. And of course, I think we have the legal compliance that we all have to be really careful to. And we do have local regulations in some places. In the European Union, we do have an EU AI Act that we should follow. So I think we should all kind of become informed about the legal context in which we operate, be it specific to AI or other types of regulations, such as data, privacy, and so on, that sort of impact how we use AI. So, in terms of how we select tools and frameworks and instruments, I'm thinking protecting learning and positioning AI as human-centered, looking at it as a tool to produce positive impact, and of course, not negotiating safety and safeguarding design principles. So these would be my thoughts.
Thank you, Catalina. I think we will continue to grapple with this tension between adopting too fast different AI solutions for education and being overprotective. This will be a tension that we will see in education for the next following years, and it might be difficult to grasp right now, but it's been an hour since we've started the discussion. And we promised the participants in the webinar that we will take some questions. So I want to allocate the next 15 minutes for a question that helps us project a bit in the future. And also, I'm inviting you to take each around 5 minutes for closing remarks as well. But the question, which is equally a challenge, and it's an imagination exercise, 10 years from now, in 2036, what's one thing that you believe we need to do right now very well in terms of deploying AI in education to make sure that everybody has a decent level of AI literacy and they are responsible citizens who can navigate the challenges that this kind of technology is bringing to our lives? So I'll go to Natalie.
Yeah, that's it's hard to pick one. I think the one I would try to work towards right now is providing more resources to teachers and developing like more teachers who are able to like do this kind of work. I think globally we see all of these challenges with adapting AI tools and students using it in a way that hinders their own learning, and educators are the key at like fixing some of these problems. And in the US, at least, they're extremely under-resourced and there's not enough of them. So that's my key contribution, I think. And I feel like a lot of companies are currently focusing on the bandwidth and access issue, but as we've covered today, even if you have access to the most advanced AI tools, if you're not using them in a way that helps you, it's harmful and you're giving away your data. So I think the educator piece is the biggest one for me.
Thank you, Natalie. And if you had one piece of advice for nonprofit professionals on how to best use AI in their educational interventions, what would that be?
I think it's AI for skills building is probably the best use case I've seen. So we know that when students are learning concepts, like when they're learning calculus, they need a bunch of different problems to practice through. And I think AI is excellent at doing that.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to share a reflection on how 2036 can look magnificent for us if we do the right thing today?
Oh, please let that happen. Yeah, look, I think for me, my wish, if I had a crystal ball, was that we move forward with our eyes wide open about this, that we're informed and we take an informed position moving forward. I don't want us to get to 2036 and look back and say, oh, we rushed in and we didn't have the evidence we needed to make an informed decision about rolling that out across an education system. So I think making sure that we're making informed choices is really key for me, and that takes it takes work and it takes effort and it takes collective effort to make sure that we're well informed. And I think that will put us in the best possible position, I hope, in the future.
Thank you. And your piece of advice for nonprofit professionals, how to make the most out of AI?
Yeah, look, I would always say to start with your own education in AI. Because the thing, and I say this to teachers as well, before you start redesigning lesson plans with AI, why don't you start by, an administrative task, like, managing the lunch orders or managing, the collection of forms for a school trip or something. Because I think sometimes we rush into, I'm going to, redesign a whole curriculum with this, or I'm going to roll this out across an education intervention. But actually, we need to start with our own understanding. And if we can understand the AI systems and how they work in a very small way, and then we can increase that, then we can start rolling out at a larger scale. So I think, and this is something for NGOs everywhere, to invest a little bit in themselves and their own education, their own understanding, so that then as they're rolling out that intervention, they are leading from an informed position that will really support and ensure the effectiveness of that implementation.
Thank you, Sarah. Catalina?
So in terms of what we need to have a positive outcome 10 years from now, I do think that putting the resources in the right place is really important. And I'm thinking here the financial resources, but also the resources of systems such as public educational systems, because I don't think we can achieve what we desire in terms of AI literacy and proper AI implementation without having educational systems deploy this. I don't think any of our organizations have the capacity alone to do such a change in the system. So I think this is necessary in terms of public policy to have the resources put in the right place. And as Sarah mentioned, I think this has to be a society-wide conversation that we need to have, even though some of the topics might be uncomfortable. So I'm not I know there's a tension there as well between having a very large and inclusive consultation process and moving towards actual implementation. But I think these are necessary steps for us to look back and say, okay, we went down the right road. So yeah.
Thank you. This has been very eye-opening for me, and I'm sure for all the participants. And I feel like we need to continue the conversation, and we need to dive deeper into this topic because it's so generous, and we can approach it from so many perspectives. I wanted to take the next maybe 15 to 20 minutes to go a bit through the questions from our audience today. And I have some questions here lined up. And I will address the questions to all of you, and feel free to jump in and take it if it's relevant to your work expertise. And this is a question that also uh, concerns me personally, so I will read it. How do you involve parents in the conversation, not just the spectators, but as active participants in this AI revolution in education? So yeah, feel free to take the floor and maybe share how you look at this, if you have experience in working with parents. And I see Natalie, she's agreeing with this. Maybe you want to be the first one to take it.
Yes, I don't claim to have the most experience in this area, but again, going back to the global apathon that I've mentioned and Catalina's mentioned a few times before, we've been running it for many years now. And then in our second year, we got a lot of requests from families who wanted to participate together, which is why we opened it up for teams of all ages. So going back to my point about computational action, which is giving students opportunities to build something that helps their selves, their immediate communities. For a lot of younger students, that person they're trying to help is usually a family member because they know what's going on in their families very well and very closely. It might be like, I want to help my mom with the grocery list, or I want to help my grandparent with who's hard of hearing with like a tool that can tell them when the tea kettle is whistling. So a lot of those kind of interventions where we're encouraging students to think about real problems and designing solutions around them involve parents and family support. And that becomes a natural point for them to connect. And right now, we're also looking at, in collaboration with MIT, doing a program for parents and kids to go to a workshop together. So I think a lot of our past workshops have been like only child focused. And this will be an experiment, but I have a lot of hopes because I think a lot of parents they're very nervous and also excited about AI, and they really want to be engaged.
Yeah, that's essential. Catalina, Sarah, do you want to share your perspective here?
Yeah, I might just quickly add, look, I think, whenever you think about education, in my mind, there's this triad of school, parent, and child. And you can't address any of this without the parents being fundamental to that. I think the challenge that we have at the moment is who is responsible for that parent education piece. Because obviously educators feel very directly responsible for the education of students. Is that a government responsibility, the parent education? Is that a school responsibility to then educate parents as well? It's thinking about where that sits. And I feel at the moment parents are getting a little bit lost in that gap. But they are fundamental to getting AI and education right. And actually, what I'm increasingly seeing in my work is that it is the students that are then educating the parents around AI. Now, it certainly happens in my house. My 15-year-old is the expert who teaches me. And I think this interplay is really important, and how we leverage that and develop that and build on that is going to be really important. But I can't imagine a world where in any educational conversation, parents are not fundamental to that, but we've just got to perhaps signpost that more clearly in terms of the work that we're doing, and signal that parents are a fundamental, important piece of that conversation.
What I can add from our perspective is something that has to do with what I've shared initially about the Romanian context, that we do have very low digital skills at the level of the general population, including parents, and especially in poor communities where we work. And we've seen this very clearly when the pandemic started, that there was very little support that parents could give to their children to stay connected. And I think that was in itself a tragedy for those students back then. But I think I don't have a solution, a clear solution on the table, but I think we all have to run experiments, as Natalie shared, and to try and see how we can also involve parents. And I do acknowledge the contamination efforts that Sarah has mentioned, and we've seen this for families in our program, that children were often the ones to pick up more quickly on digital skills and pass it on to their parents, and it became an activity of the family, so to say. But I'm not sure that we can do it top down in our organizations, to first reach parents and then hope that they will be the ones to support children. I think it's going to be more circular than that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for considering this perspective of parent engagement. And then I see Simona, thank you for the question. And I think there were others who raised this. And of course, as Sarah was saying, this triangle of parent, school, educator should work naturally, but unfortunately it doesn't in many communities, and especially when you work in underserved communities with low education attainment parents, the challenges are very big. And then the question I guess that I see here is this the responsibility of the nonprofit sector to address this, or should this be part of a systemic approach, a policy that ensures that the entire population has basic digital AI literacy, and you need that kind of systemic vision and measures to make it happen. But of course, we can't ignore parents in this equation, and it's essential. And yeah, I guess we need to include it in a very consistent manner in all our interventions, but also the burden of doing that as under-resourced nonprofit organizations are working with kids on developing AI literacy or using AI to support teachers. It's quite challenging. I see other questions, and I think Mihai was asking about a recommendation regarding AI, how to use AI in the educational process, maybe a recommendation from EU, UNICEF, or other bodies. And I know that Sarah mentioned something from the United Kingdom's government, the Ministry of the Ministry of Education there has some sort of guidelines from this perspective. So maybe you can share a bit more about it. And Natalie and Catalina, if you have other insights, I mean, beyond the UNESCO framework, which I think it's very useful in, and even the guideline from UNESCO on education, on how to use Gen AI in education, I think that's also very valuable. And I will invite my colleague Andrea maybe to share the link here. But Sarah, if you would like to talk a bit about those guidelines that you found very, very useful, and that can be an example for other countries, practitioners, and so on.
Yeah, certainly. Look, we're in a fortunate place that there is a lot of good work happening to help and guide and support. It's just a case of finding the right one for you and that you find accessible and relevant to your context. I think, as we've said, the UNESCO frameworks are a great starting place. If you haven't engaged with those before, the OECD also has their AI Observatory, which has a wonderful website and resource of policies all over the world. Stanford University also has a wonderful repository of resources and policies and research articles that you can find there. Within our AIEOU hub, we also share a lot of resources and things. So there are a lot of freely available open access resources that you can tap into. Obviously, Natalie's brilliant work at MIT and her colleagues at MIT as well. MIT Raise, the Day of AI programs. There's a whole range of resources available. So it's a little bit of a doing a search, but I'm sure when we send out the recording next week, we could also include a couple of those links to help people that maybe are not aware of those organisations and the work that they're doing, just to sort of see some of the free open access resources that are available out there as a starting point.
That's a great idea, Sarah. And we will definitely do that. And I see that our colleague Andrea shared some resources from UNESCO here, but maybe I don't know if Natalie or Katalina want to pinpoint any other resources.
Yeah, I dropped the link in the chat as well. There's another document in addition to the guidance for Gen AI that I think is pretty helpful. It's AI and Education Guidance for Policymakers. The titles are very similar, so it's a little confusing. I think they're both worth looking at. And another question that I get often is like, what AI tools should we be using? And right now we are doing a project with UNESCO in Latin America where we're developing a MOOC for teacher AI literacy, and we're talking about like privacy preserving and language and culture, and it's really difficult to give a recommendation, and I don't think UNESCO or OECD probably have specific recommendations because they don't want to say like this is a good company. But for me personally, I'm recommending Mistral. I think so. They're based in Europe and they're very good about privacy preservation compared to a lot of the other LLMs. So if you haven't heard of that, I think I'd recommend you take a look.
Thank you, Natalie. Katerina, is something else you would like to add? No, okay, fine. I have so we have Laura here in the chat who was very diligent with the questions, and we will not have enough time to answer to all of them. But thank you, Laura, for joining the session and for expressing so much curiosity about the topic. I will just pick one of them, and I'll pick the first one related to the responsibility of AI company deploying AI tools in education. If you feel that they bear the responsibility on potential negative effects of high usage of such tools, and how do you see any sort of mitigation strategy from this perspective? And I know there's discussion at global level on this topic, how this AI companies should be responsible for this kind of effects, but no clear solutions at this point. So I was curious how it looks like, this conversation looks like from where you stand. Maybe Sarah?
Yeah, certainly. I guess this is, as I referenced earlier, I'm particularly feeling positive about the UK product safety standards that have been developed, and they are going to a broader public consultation later this year, and then we'll look at how we operationalise and regulate those. Those standards really put the onus on the technology companies to meet those requirements for those tools to be able to be used in UK schools. So I know that sort of doesn't extend beyond the classroom, but it's a really good framing in terms of a messaging to technology companies to say, if you are building a product for use by young people in the UK in a learning context, these are the base requirements for your system. And it's things like not anthropomorphizing AI, so if you're in an AI tutoring context, that the student understands they are engaging with a computer platform. It's not made to look like a human teacher. And I think they are really big steps forward in terms of mitigating some of the major concerns that we have. And so I think working to develop those kinds of standards for product that and sending very clear messaging to say, if you are building a product for use in our schools, these are the minimum requirements of excellence that we want for our young people. So I think I'd love to see more and more of that kind of work. And then, but then at the same time, coming back to my place as a researcher, we need the body of evidence to know the impact that this will have on young people and teaching and learning. So concurrently, we can't let go of the research agenda to really understand the impacts that this may have. And that's a challenge, right? It's a challenge we've got to work through. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. We all feel the need to dive deeper into data, but the data is scarce at this point. I read very often the research on AI impact on children because we work with children. It's a topic that concerns me, and yes, we need to make sure that we have more data to inform our decisions. And of course, when it comes to the companies that develop AI, we need them to be more responsible in the way they design. And we had a nice experience of building an AI assistant for the children we are working with, and the experience of piloting it was very interesting for us, and just to make sure that we design something that is useful and adapted to the realities of the kids, and taking a lot of input from them. So many times as this technology develops very fast, we have the expectation to also have products that are delivered very fast, but this speed doesn't mean that you are able to integrate the real needs of the final users, which in this case are kids. And I think we need to curate this kind of patience when it comes to research and in AI. And patience doesn't seem to be something we are very good at in this world dominated by uncertainty at this point. But I think it's the type of muscle we need to practice a lot.
It's
We
true.
do still.
Sorry, I was
Please.
just going to add one more thing on that point, if that's okay. Because I
Sure.
think you made a really important point there when you're talking about the design and development. I think the other aspect of this with the products as well is looking at the metrics of success for those products. So, we often look at, the metrics of, how we incentivize investment in products that are developed, how we measure the outputs of those. Is it predominantly it's engagement, retention, I shouldn't say this in front of Natalie, who's the app expert, but, looking at things like, retention, keep people engaged. But actually, if we change the metrics of success for an AI product that's being used in education to say, does it progress educational outcomes as the number one metric of success, then that would completely change the way we approach this as well. So I think our shared definitions of success in these product development space is really important too.
Yeah, if I could add something as well. Also, can you hear me okay? My headphones ran out of power, so I'm
Yeah,
not.
Yes, it's good.
Yeah, so in the AI generation curriculum we developed with UiPath, we had one unit where we had the students analyze what are the values that these companies care about. And we started with like, imagine it's a child's birthday and you're buying a birthday cake. What does the baker care about? It's probably like cost/profit, and then maybe taste, and then probably not nutrition at all. And then the parent would probably care about like nutrition and costs, and taste just has to be good enough. And then the child only cares about the taste, right? And then we shifted that to let's analyze social media apps and Instagram. The companies care about making a profit, and that leads to engagement and revenue and addiction. So that's their lever for success. And I think if it's a for-profit AI company, it's going to be like really, really hard to incentivize them to put something else above profit unless policymakers force them to do that, which in America is a little bit challenging right now, but that's why I think parents are also a part of this conversation and teachers. We can choose tools that are more privacy preserving, and it's going to be more work, and we have to like vote and make our voices heard and educate ourselves. But it's kind of a whole village type of solution.
The only thing I have to add on this conversation, and I'm going back directly to, or specifically to Laura's question, if we believe that companies bear the responsibility, I would say if not the companies that develop the tools bear the responsibility, then it means that the individual user, student, or teacher bears the responsibility, and that's a very unequal footing to be on. So I think that every time when I think there's this big discussion on algorithms and social media and so on, I think it's very unfair to place responsibility on the individual learner in a world that's dominated by algorithm supremacy in a way. So for sure, there should be responsibility built into the legal framework. And I think that in Europe, we are doing work in this direction, and we are placing education as a high risk use of AI. And there are frameworks that we can work with, and even individually as organizations, we can look at standards such as Sarah shared and guide our decisions.
So this is the perfect segue to closing this wonderful conversation. I wanted to express my gratitude again, Natalie, Sarah, Catalina, for joining the conversation, for sharing your expertise. And I do feel like there will be other spaces in which we will take this to the next level. Buckle up, because some invitations will will be in your inbox at some point to do that. I stay with the thought that to some extent we need to reflect more on this idea of enhancing the capacity of parents to navigate AI challenges and to basically help them be better than policymakers, because policymakers are not able at this point to keep up with the speed of AI and the impact it has in education. So maybe that's also a point of reflection for our audience today, and nonprofit professionals who are working on the ground and that need to integrate AI in their day-to-day interventions. Our events on the topic of AI and the nonprofit sector this week continue tomorrow and on Friday. And check your emails. If you submitted an application to join the event on the legislative framework or on fundraising and AI. We are looking forward to seeing you tomorrow and on Friday in these sessions. And thank you again for being with us. And I'm happy we managed to reflect together on all these topics. Have a wonderful day.